Okay, well, I think just in the interest of time, I know the first half an hour or so is really dedicated to, LSU facilitating really a dialogue between the cohorts. So I don't want to make sure we give enough time for that, but really just wanted to open it up by starting off and saying, over the last 5 months, we've been through, this is the 20th session together. We've heard from over 40 different key leaders and subject matter experts across the real estate development process and the industry across a number of different jurisdictions in the region. And so today is really focused on our, being our final session for now. We to have some sort of a celebration and party when we can come together, when all of this COVID-19 blows over. But today is really the final session for us, our regular weekly meetings, and we thought it would be best to allow the opportunity for the cohort members, our participants through the DC area EDI program to re-engage in a dialogue with Capital Impact Partner CEO Ellis Carr, as well as to hear and share with sort of insights, and especially now with everything that's going on with the established real estate developer Jair Lynch. And so Ellis will facilitate a fireside chat with Jair around in the next half an hour or so. But before that, it seems, I guess I'll just hand it over to Ellis to really start the dialogue and the conversation.
Thanks, Kayla. I appreciate it. And good afternoon, everybody. When I was thinking about, first, I guess it's really good to be with you guys today, although I can't see you all and interact with you in the way that I had hoped to. And as Kayla mentioned, it's hard to believe that it's been over 5 months. I think we did the kickoff in November, really about 6 months ago. And I'm glad that we finally have gotten to this place. That said, to Kayla's point, we have to find a time to celebrate in person once this pandemic once we're beyond the pandemic, and I look forward to doing that with you all. So as Kayla mentioned, I would love to, I didn't have a chance to spend as much time with you over these last 5 months, but would really like to use this as an opportunity to just engage with you all, not to just talk at you, but really engage with you around how the process has been for you and reflections that you've had over the course of time that you've been in the program, and really engage in the conversation about the here and now today, how you all are managing through COVID-19, the implications and impacts you're seeing, and love to engage you in a dialogue about that as well, because we are, quite frankly, seeing a number of things across the country that, in my mind, are troubling. And I think it underscores, again, how important you are to the fabric of the built environment, and want to ensure that you all are successful in those ventures. But before I maybe just open it up, so please be prepared to engage with me. I'd just like to reflect back a little bit on some of the comments that I made in the November conversation. I think when we kicked off EDI, we talked about how growth needs to happen in an inclusive way. We talked about in order for us to have kind of inclusive development and growth, it was incumbent that you had a diverse group of folks around the table that had various levels of knowledge, skills, and capacities and experience to really add to the conversation. And that was particularly important because we really need to address the educational, health, and wealth disparities that are particularly more pronounced in communities of color. So we developed EDI, to Kayla's point, focused around primarily 3 key objectives. One, to increase knowledge and network building for real estate developers of color. in kind of like an immediate short-term type of outcome. Secondarily, really contributing that you all will contribute to the neighborhood stabilization and revitalization of the emerging areas, both here and also in Detroit. And that would be really kind of seeing that over the next 2 to 5 years. And then 5 years and beyond, really looking at outcomes where we can really help to support the racial wealth disparities that exist in our communities. And so really those have been the three kind of stated objectives. But I would say for me specifically, EDI is much more than that. It's really around how we can find a way, we, Capital Impact, can find a way to elevate you, to elevate your business, your work, and your personal story, because your personal stories will inspire others to get off the sidelines and get involved, as you all have decided to do that. I also think this is a great opportunity to help kind of your continued support, both professionally and financially, and also to help you find new partnerships to take your business to the next level. And so we'll have a conversation with Jair today to really talk about his business and his story, so that it can be an inspiration to you, but also that it can also be a learning opportunity for you to think about how to navigate your business. So just two other small points that I'll mention, and then I'd love to kind of get your feedback around how the program has lived up to your expectations and the objectives that we have articulated. And those 2 points are just really around network and collective impact. There's so much knowledge, skills, and experiences in this virtual room. And I know each and every one of you has a vision for your business, but I encourage you to strongly remember that we're stronger together. And that if you haven't already considered thinking about how you can partner with folks within the existing kind of cohort, it's extremely important, and particularly in difficult times like today, where we're seeing some of the developers in our portfolio experience some pretty significant strain. It's important that you think about partnership in these opportunities. And lastly, I just want to just reiterate Capital Impact's commitment to this work and the EDI program specifically, in the replication of the DC cohort, and also exploring opportunities to expand the program beyond DC and Detroit within CIP's footprint. In Detroit, we've specifically been developing kind of a financial product for EDI kind of participants or graduates. And we've, pre-COVID-19, we were in discussions with the city of Detroit to think about how to give EDI graduates to be able to take advantage of the opportunity that the city was having around development RFPs, given that they have a focus on racial equity. So again, I know when we first sat down together at the convening, there was a lot of discussion around how can Capital Impact help you and your business, and I hope we have continued to answer that, and but also just know that we have offered up kind of our broader network to ensure that we can really support you both through the program but also after. So let me just pause there and just see thoughts, questions, and reflections that you all have had during the course of your time in the EDI program. Somebody's got to be the first one to jump out there.
Just a reminder for folks, you'll need to hit *7 to unmute. Looks like a couple folks may have tried to ask a question.
Hey, Ellis, this is Babatunde. Can you hear me?
Yep, I can. Hey, Bobby.
All right. And Babatunde, sorry, I'm a little muffled. Yeah. Wanted to know, what are your thoughts in terms of how COVID-19 is affecting real estate development as a whole? When I look at Washington, D.C., I know DC has the Housing Production Trust Fund, and we're going into a new budget season. And when you talk about affordable housing in DC, a lot of the projects are getting some form of subsidy from DC. And I know that the FY21 budget will be very contentious, very competitive for funding. And if that funding is cut, how will that impact the development of affordable housing? And more importantly, how would that impact the developers who rely on that funding to get their projects off the ground?
Yeah, thank you for your question. I mean, I guess at the highest level, I am particularly concerned about COVID-19 impacts to communities of color first and foremost. I think that given that there's mainly essential working available, that has really caused some significant strain on kind of communities across the country, specifically those retail focused businesses. And I'll get to the affordable housing in a second, but I think it's relevant because we are seeing, again, some significant strain in communities of color, and specifically with some of the stimulus package that has actually been run through the triple payroll protection plan, the triple P program, that is providing kind of immediate relief to businesses and entrepreneurs, some of whom are developers, right? And other establishments aren't really getting the support that they need, mainly because large financial institutions have been focusing on their clients, and typically, more larger clients at that, to get access to that. So what does that mean? That means that businesses, I think, are going to suffer significant and potentially permanent setbacks as a result of this, which is going to affect the built environment. What we've seen, to your point, across the country is that states and cities actually responding to COVID have received some federal appropriations, and they're doing as much as they can. But as you all know, it's effectively a zero-sum game for the most part, and municipalities are having to react. And so we've seen in Michigan the 9% tax credit round be suspended. We've seen in some states permitting, shops closing, folks not being able to get out to the jobs to do inspections, and development coming to a halt. And we've also seen, in one case, I was trading emails with a developer who said that 25% of their properties either have folks moving out or not paying rent. So it's providing a significant impact literally across the country. And I think it's going to put some significant strain on the subsidies that are required to get some of these transactions done, to your point. The other side of the coin, though, and this is more kind of theoretical, but I think this is kind of a post-COVID-19 world. What the pandemic has really, I think, evidence is that businesses and people in particular do not need to be in person for everything. And so I've already heard from a number of larger Fortune 50 companies who are already talking about reducing their footprint pretty significantly, because it's a huge cost-saving measure. And so I believe that you're going to see potentially the opportunity to repurpose commercial space, specifically office, to think about ways of addressing the affordable housing crisis across the country.
I actually have two follow-up questions to that. To your last point, in terms of repurposing existing office space, there will be significant challenges to that, right? You have to go through zoning, and so we're talking I don't want to say years, but we're talking a significant amount of time in order just to go through that process. And here in DC, we're going through a revision of the comp plan. And so that wasn't baked into the comp plan. And DC only does the comp plan every 10 years. So I just don't know how feasible that option is for a city such as the District of Columbia. So, what do you think that local government could do to help expedite that process, right? Because that's going to be the first thing. And then like the back end of that is providing the necessary funding to retrofit those buildings. Like, where is that capital going to come from? And then my next question is from a small business perspective. And this is more of a theoretical question that I have in regards to how can capital impact help push a lot of the money from the government, from the federal government, to local businesses that don't have all of the infrastructure and the paperwork in place to receive that funding. With the federal government, in order to receive funding, it's a very bureaucratic process. You need a DUNS number. You need all types of different types of verification for your business. And a lot of small businesses, especially here in the District of Columbia, they just don't have all of that, right? So how can capital impact play a role in pushing that money coming from the federal level to the very local level?
Sure. So let me start with the second one first. And I think we have been over the last 3 weeks, we've been trying to figure out just that, right? So capital impact, as you all know, has really focused on kind of real estate secured lending. And what we are acutely aware of is how small businesses are being affected across the country. And so we've been really thinking about ways for us to directly support small businesses. And as you all probably know, that there has been literally, I think what I would say is every 24 hours have been pretty significant policy changes at the federal, state, and local levels, which we have to kind of reassess a strategy that we've developed, say, 48 hours prior. And so the challenge that we've run into in other CDFIs, in particular community development financial institutions, is that we are non-depository institutions. And currently, non-depository institutions have received the bulk of that support from the federal government to be effectively the financial intermediaries for that. So the existing stimulus package that is being talked about right now is debating that exact fact for organizations like Capital Impact, who are non-depository financial institutions, to have access to some of the stimulus money, so we can, because we are proximate to community and have partners who are, that we can quickly get that money out to the places that are most in need. And so that is actually the very point right now that policymakers are having on the Hill, or virtually on the Hill right now, that is tied up in this existing stimulus package. So that's one. And then I think the other one is really thinking about, we've been having conversations with partners who are focused and have availability of resources for small businesses, to support small businesses, and thinking about developing strategic partnerships with them, so that we can, if it's nothing more than to connect two parties who don't know each other, to be able to do that so that capital can flow at scale to small businesses. And then I think the first question, you're right. It's going to take a significant amount of time, and I would just say this, that it is extremely hard to kind of think about what concretely that needs to happen right now, because we don't know when the end, how long this is going to go on, and what implications or impacts are going to this is going to have on the federal budget, as well as the in this case the DC budget. So I wish I had a better answer to that right now, but I think it's too early to tell right this second. And I think it's something that we're going to have to keep our eye on. But I do think there will be a dramatic shift in the usage of space going forward. More than 66,000 people have filed claims for unemployment insurance. So let me just ask the question while we're paused. I mean, how are you all feeling about the program? Has it met your expectations? And what would you say that have been the most fruitful takeaways thus far in the program? All waiting on those checks and getting frustrated and taking to social media to get answers. Today, there are nearly 1,000 DC recipients who will be getting the extra money by next week. It's an additional payment. They're called a pandemic unemployment.
I think that there's some feedback in the background. If you could mute your line, unless you're speaking, that would be helpful.
I know we don't have that many shy people on the phone. Or if you feel more comfortable asking a question, I'm happy to answer as well.
Ellis?
Yes.
Ellis?
Yep.
This is Jay Briley. How's it going?
Hey, how are you, Jay? Good. How are you?
Doing good. Doing good. I just wanted to respond to your question. I think the program has been, for me, extremely helpful in the sense that from my journey to this point and going through the program, there's always a great need of network, especially in the minority community. And because a lot of times we don't have the exposure that other people have. And going through the program has given me the opportunity to be exposed to certain elements and certain players that normally I wouldn't be able to reach out to. So I think that's been very significant to the point where it has allowed me to start a project that I don't think ordinarily I would have started because of not having the correct tools or exposure to the players in the field of affordable housing.
That's great. Thank you for sharing that. And has your project, Jay, been impacted? Let me just ask this. How has your project been impacted by COVID? How are you managing through that?
Well, I'm at the early stages of my project. So,
okay.
Doing conference calls and exchanging ideas as well as information via through the phone or through the internet has been fine. I'm not on the ground or boots on the ground or shoveling in the ground at this point, so it hasn't impacted. I am getting leery of the fact of what it's going to mean when it comes to once I get to the point where financing comes into play and the resources that the county may have or may not have, or the federal level, as well as the private source. So that's the only thing that I'm seeing that's going to be definitely a major challenge for all of us. One of my projects over in Prince William County, and I've talked to the people at the state level that they say there's not an issue. But again, this was about 2 months prior to this, and I haven't reached out to them since. But there's no question from what history has shown us, when things get tight, the first thing that they scoop up is those programs or services that are given to those are in greatly need is taken. So that's the only thing that I'm finding that will probably be a challenge for all of us at this point.
I agree. Other perspectives?
Hi, it's Mikey. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, Alice. Thanks for being with us here today. I just want to share that I think the networking piece has gone really well throughout the program. I also really appreciate Capital Impact Partners' willingness to be flexible with our needs throughout. So as we've asked for additional sessions around to meet with lending partners or have a pro forma development session. You guys have been pretty flexible in addressing those needs. That's something that I'm hoping will continue even after the cohort is complete. You all have mentioned the coming financial products that will be established for this group. So, given from what I've seen, the conversations I have, we fall across the spectrum in terms of where we are in our, real estate development journey. So, hopefully that, will be kind of taken into consideration for those financial products as well. And will be brought into those conversations to kind of drive how that's being developed.
That's great. And what would you say, the areas that you found most benefit in during the kind of the training curriculum?
The sessions that have been most helpful?
Yes.
Yeah, I think for me, the construction management session with Bazzuto, that was very helpful. And really, it's been more of a couple of conversations that just I tune into throughout the sessions, especially around establishing systems and thinking through how to, build on those systems. I am pretty much in the early stage of investing and developing my company. So, I'm always thinking about looking for tools and processes that people have implemented successfully to be able to replicate that. Because I think that's just one of the really important ingredients to scaling. And so that's something that I've just keyed into throughout the sessions. And, folks have been really good about sharing information, sharing what they do, how they do it. So that's been helpful for me.
That's great. That's great. Thank you.
Hey, Ellis, this is Paul Stanford.
How you doing?
Pretty good. Yeah, so I would say the best experience I got out of it was just learning more how real estate development works in DC. I work day to day. My regular day job is with Fairfax County Department of Housing.
Mm-hmm.
That how real estate development works in Northern Virginia, but the DC piece was what I was missing the most, as well as some of the areas in Maryland, like Montgomery County. So I would say that's probably one of the biggest things that I got from it. Because eventually, my goal is to hopefully invest in DC one day. But till then, I'm out in Baltimore, but DC is one of my goals.
That's great. That's great. Have any of you all thought about partnering up?
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that too, because that's one of the things that I want to do moving forward. I met some good people in this program, and that taught me that this whole development and investment game is not. It's more of a marathon. So I really appreciated that. I had to always start big. I mean, I started with my triplex last year, but I thought that the next goal is a 20 unit or whatnot, but I got to learn how to move in steps. So that's one of the things that I talk with some folks, and I definitely want to partner up with people in this program in the future.
That's great. That's great. Well, I mean, I think to that point, I think it's incumbent on, and you guys have all kind of alluded to, staying in contact and thinking about ways to formally connect. I would also encourage you to do that. You guys probably also know that the first Detroit cohort has organized and is meeting together. And I think if I were to say, as I travel across the country, what most investors and funders ask me about repeatedly is this program. And so finding ways to continually put yourself out there collectively to garner more support, I think it is the right thing to do. Because again, people can't find ways to partner with you if they don't know where to find you. And so again, this is an opportunity. The program has afforded you all an opportunity to lift up your work and your businesses across the region, and thinking about ways to continually have that in the forefront for people, I think is important.
I agree. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. other thoughts or questions?
Yeah, Jay. I'm sorry. Ellis, this is Howard Irvin calling with Parallax Development Group. I had a question. Obviously, what's been going on with this, pandemic, what have you, has caused us to not stay the path that was intentionally set as far as meeting face to face or whatever. But I thought I heard one of your associates at Capital Impact Partners speak upon another group starting up in the summer, and I think, and they're going to have sessions like we had. My question is, at the end of their session, will participants in this session be allowed to maybe to interact and network with those participants? And it's kind of a situation where we're kind of killing two birds with one stone. We don't have our final networking, but now we'll get to kind of come back on the back end and also meet new people, because that might mean other opportunities to network and partner up on deals with a new set of people who are now in the program. Sure.
Kayla, do you want to take that? Or I'm happy to talk about it if necessary.
No, absolutely. I think it's a great question, Howard. One of the things that we're looking to do, actually beginning in the next couple of weeks after, this program, or at least this cohort, has sort of wrapped up, is to take a look, do some evaluations. We'll be gathering some information from you all, similar to what we did initially, to really get a sense of in what ways we may be able to continue to maintain and manage, ongoing dialogue and conversations, and just more broadly a relationship with each one of you. And I think there may be some opportunities to integrate you all into some of the sessions where it makes sense, as well as after that cohort has sort of graduated and is also an alum or considered alumni of the program, that there's continuing to be these conversations, continuing to build this community, this ecosystem of developers of color. So that's certainly our intention. Ellis, I don't know if you had other things you wanted to add to that.
Yeah, and Howard, thanks for the question. I mean, Lauren and I went up to Detroit for the kickoff of the second cohort in Detroit, and there were, I'd say, probably half, if not more, of the first cohort present, and actually actively talking with the incoming participants for the second cohort in Detroit. And I think that was really, one, great to watch, but it just happened so naturally because there was, shared experience there that I think can and should be built off of similarly in DC. So, I like to see how we can continue to help foster that in the future, because again, as you guys know, the real estate development circle is small to begin with. And to the extent that we can help to foster stronger connections and dialogue, I think we'd love to be able to do that. So let me just pause here. Jair, are you on the line? I think I saw, hold on just one second. No, I saw him. Let's see. I think he was on, must have dropped. So why don't we do one more question? Let me just ping him real quick.
I think I see him. The line is muted at present, so I don't know if he needs to unmute or hit.
Oh, there he is.
Oh.
Hey, Jair, how you doing, man?
Good.
There you
All
go.
right. Here we go.
There you are. Well, thanks, first and foremost, Jair. Thanks for taking time to call in today. Really appreciate it. Know it's a trying time for all of us, and I'm sure we can get into that. But this is the last kind of session for our DMV Equitable Development Initiative for our first cohort. Can you hear me? Jair, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, perfect. So this is the last convening that we're having for our first cohort for the Equitable Development Initiative, and for the participants on the phone, Jair came and talked to a roundtable that we had late last year or middle last year. That really was the catalyst for us to bring kind of this program here to DC. So Jair, thanks again for calling in, and just want to just spend a couple minutes with you just talking about kind of your journey, how you got to today, and would love, as we get down into some of the questions, to talk about the current environment and how you're navigating and what you see as kind of what a post-COVID-19 world looks like on the in development. So with that, love for you just to kind of share your journey, how you got here, how you got started, what was your journey to here today, and how'd you get started in real estate development?
Well, first of all, I hope everyone is doing well and their families and colleagues are safe. That has been paramount for us as we've been looking at this for about 8 weeks now. We started in mid-February, but we have all our folks that are safe, they're healthy, they're working remotely, they're motivated, and they continue to just do amazing things. And so it's been very, very impressive to see the resiliency of our organization and really what it's come down to. And we're doing it with some brevity, some joking, some laughing. You should see the backgrounds folks have been able to put on the screen.
Exactly.
It's been pretty amazing. But basically to go back to where I started, I tell people this is the only job I've ever had, in the sense that I've only worked in real estate and development. I went to Stanford and studied civil engineering and urban design, and could have easily moved in many directions coming out of that, but was taught by my first boss, Don Young, who said, do you want to be a consultant or do you want to be an owner? And I think that really resonated with me, that I wanted to be an owner, and wanted to work on the ownership side of the business instead of working to design buildings or to be on that side or the construction side. And so, really learning my chops in Silicon Valley, and learned all about development out there, primarily because, a gentleman by the name of Ken Coleman, who wanted to see diversity happen in the real estate space inside a company called Silicon Graphics. And so he very much, got me inside that group, and I was able to flourish, primarily because they were used to 20-year-olds doing everything on the business side, on the computer side. And so they instilled that kind of culture onto the real estate side. And we were developing sales offices, manufacturing facilities, R&D facilities, throughout the world, and I was primarily working on the corporate headquarters, which of course was near and dear to the C-suite, and that also gave me a lot of understanding of what drove owners of businesses about their real estate. And now, that corporate campus is now in the hands of Google, and so what you guys now see as Googleplex is the stuff that I worked on as the young engineer, carrying the briefcase of my boss and doing every site visit, doing every punch list, understanding every component of the business. And so it was a great journey to start working there because of the speed and scale that you worked at, and then bringing that skill set back to where my heart was, which was in Washington, D.C., where I grew up, recognizing that, I left and there were still many scars on 14th Street, 8th Street, and other places that were from the 60s, and nothing had changed, and wanting to come back and really start to affect that change in the late 90s. And then has essentially been building the business ever since, here in DC for over 20 years. And now we have grown significantly. We're 20 people. We've got about $1.8 billion in assets under management. And we are, really having fun, changing the landscape of the region.
That's great. So you said a few things, Jair. You said learning your craft. I heard you talk about carrying your boss's briefcase and the like. Talk a little bit about kind of what you felt like your keys to success are. You started to talk about them, but maybe explicitly to kind of think about, as you reflect back on your career, what would you say the keys to your success were?
Well, I think that in this business, it's perseverance, one, and two, it's recognizing it is a craft, and recognizing that just because you got one deal done does not mean that all of those skills are going to be relevant when the next situation comes up. And I liken it to, just because you're able to win one game against a Titan, or one game against, the top ranked team, it's much different than an entire season, or even, as they say, sometimes even a playoff season. It's very difficult to win, 4 out of 7 if you can barely win one. And it's primarily because you have to understand situations. You have to be able to read situations. You have to think 3 steps ahead, and all of that comes from experience. It doesn't come from just reading a book. And it doesn't come from just one deal. It really comes from really understanding the craft, understanding your own business, understanding other people's deals, and making sure that you can make the right decisions. And so for us, it's perseverance, it's clarity of the 10,000 hours that it takes to learn the business, and then it's also just being humble because it changes. And then after that, you've got to be able to evolve and change, day by day, and that's evident right now, that we've all had to change and make sure we pivot our business. And you have to decide whether you're doing it with a full deck of cards or only half a deck. And I think this time we're very, very fortunate to have a much stronger balance sheet than we had in 2008. I'm not looking over our shoulder. I'm not looking at payroll. We're really looking at opportunity and expansion at this point. And it's because this is when real estate fortunes are made.
So we're going to come back to those 2 points: strong balance sheet, what it took to get there, and then what you're seeing as opportunities. But before we get there, I'm curious if you could just describe your first real estate deal. What did that look like?
Well, the first real estate deal there's
probably
three versions of that. The first ones were at Silicon Graphics, where I wasn't on the deal team that was actually doing the $100 million line of credit. I was the person who was counting the number of bodies and how they fit into a space. I mean, it was very very mundane, basic stuff. And slowly but surely, you earn your chops, and then before I knew it, I was on the phone, doing a line of credit for them for $100 million. And I couldn't believe I was doing it, because it was just a few days earlier that I was counting the number of people that had to move into an office. Sure. So that's one set of facts as it relates to deal one. The next one was coming to DC and trying to get that interview with every big developer in the area, saying, we developed 1 million square feet in 3 years. And they said, there's no way that you did that. We don't do those type of things in DC. That must not be true. So we need you to go back and start at the bottom again. And so I decided, if I'm going to start at the bottom, I might as well do it myself. And so the first deal coming out of that was really working with a nonprofit called the Thurgood Marshall Center Trust, that had purchased a YMCA in that riot-ravished 14th Street corridor in the Shaw area off the U Street, and helping them bring some credibility to what they were trying to do, which was redevelop it into a mixed-use office and museum. And so bringing my expertise at that point to the table in the midst of a mission-driven organization was really a clash of cultures as well as a clash of styles. But it was a really important lesson, because that's how I learned how DC works. And so then you can layer that as another component of your skill set. And with that, I was able to leverage that into other deals. And then as it relates to the first deal that I would say was instrumental in our kind of growth as a investment company, was a deal that was going in to the Great Recession, which was a deal on 14th Street that we were developing, which was supposed to be condominiums, in which we thought we were going to be insulated from larger issues, because we were transit oriented, because X, because of Y. And guess what? All of that went out the window when the contagion got big enough that it affected all financial organizations, and then started affecting people at the Main Street level. And of course, we had to learn how to land the plane in the midst of the GFC, and that was another very, very important lesson in terms of being upfront, having integrity, and not waiting till the end to be able to call when there's a problem. You got to raise your hand early. You get more options that way, and we were able to pull out of that one by the skin of our teeth. But that was a big lesson learned as we started ramping up our investments.
That's great. So talk to us a little bit about let me take a step back. Oftentimes when folks talk about real estate development, it's glamorous, it's sexy, lucrative, right? These are the things you hear, and people talk about the deal. Not often enough, in my opinion, do people talk about the business of the development company. Talk a little bit about that journey, specifically, maybe just continuing that story around the last recession, and then how you're different today than you were then.
Right. Well, I think, for a long time, and I mean, many generations, real estate was executed by families, and families could make decisions around a dining room table, right?
Yep.
And they didn't have to have spreadsheets. They could, but they didn't have to have spreadsheets. They didn't have to have analysis. And that was fueled in the attempt to be able to deliver products and services to the greatest consumer generation we have, which is the baby boomers. And so developers then moved from just being local developers that were doing things through a family model to then trying to align themselves with this giant consumer monster, which was the baby boomers. And so developers often turned into specialists. No different than you saw that 50 years ago, it was a pitcher that was able to pitch in a baseball game throughout. But by the 60s and 70s, because of the advent of television and because of the advent of speed and power, you started turning pitchers that pitched in 9 innings down to specialists that pitched only 2 innings or 3 innings, and the invention of the closer and the starter and the middle reliever and all the rest. Developers were very much the same way. And what started to fuel them to become these specialists was capital. Capital started moving in a direction where they wanted alternatives, and those alternatives was important to have in a broader portfolio of investment management, to have real estate in that portfolio, whether it was 2%, 5%, 10% of the portfolio. And so they started moving, and they wanted people who have done 20, 30 deals of the same type in order to get that capital to move. And so through the specialization on all fronts, you started, as Chris Lineberger said, you started to have developers who became race car drivers. Drive fast, turn left. Drive fast, turn left. So you learned how to build a Marriott courtyard, and you didn't do 3 or 4 Marriott courtyards in your town. You just learned how to do a Marriott courtyard, and you took that across the country, and you figured out how to do Marriott courtyards at every low barrier of entry location that you could find, which is what fueled suburbanization and fueled a lot of the mistakes that we made. Because if I showed up in Iowa, the easiest thing for me to do is just to find an intersection, buy a piece of farmland, and roll over the mayor and be able to develop. And there were a lot of race car developers who went and did that. Then we started realization that we wanted to move back into cities. And I think Chris Lineberger puts it best. He says developers had to stop being race car drivers and learn how to be fighter pilots. You got to fly up, you got to fly down, you got to turn left, you got to turn right. You got to be able to do all of those things to be able to deal with a built environment that has people around it. And with those people comes all kinds of regulations, entitlements, and the rest. And those are the developers that are now flourishing, because they're able to work in these environments, walkable urban places. And now capital is also aligning with that, which is also aligning with the customer, which is the millennials and the rest. So now that you've seen this transition to this new type, what's evident in all of that unless you are at scale, whether you're the race car driver or the fighter pilot, you cannot live and die on development alone, and that you're going to have an underlying business that runs with it. A lot of those early families in that first generation that I described had property management.
Real estate alone, the underlying business.
The race car.
Can everybody mute really quickly? Go ahead, Jair. Sorry.
Yeah, when they were race car drivers, They had all kinds of underlying businesses that basically kept them alive. The same thing has to happen nowadays, and I think unfortunately there's been an allure just because there's been the maturation of the space where you think that you can just be a developer and that's it. And I think that's where I find people get caught, and they get caught because it's hard being a developer and have the cycle turn on you and everything stops. It's hard being a developer when there's no financing. It's hard to being a developer when the demand is gone. And so you have to have other components of your business that can actually survive through that. And so that's one of the reasons that we've been trying to broaden our base, moving just being from development to having a portfolio. We still have a strong development services arm, and we still have our affordable housing arm. Each one of those tangentially are in the development space, but are often counter-cyclical. And so we can actually kind of weather the storm, and we'll continue to do so by building out the portfolio base over time.
That's great. That's great. So I can't hold back anymore. I got to ask about today, how you're navigating, how are you enacting that pilot training, fighter training that you've already gone down, and what do you see as like post COVID-19 world in the built environment?
Yeah, it is. I think folks are going to have to. One, I hope folks were prepared. We started doing stress testing and recession planning about 5 quarters ago. So it was the beginning of 19. And so we did not know it was going to be COVID, but we knew that there was going to be issues. It's only been 3 months, and we've forgotten that we were having conversation about, what's going to be the end. Construction pricing is going up too high. The PE ratio on the stock market's too high. Everything was too hot. But then the music stopped, and the question was who was just talking about it and who was preparing for it. And so we, by all means, had shifted a good deal of what we were doing towards development services around what are now being called essential services or essential projects. We also ramped up our acquisitions business, and we've done about $150 million this year in acquisitions. And so we just made sure that we were going to be well prepared. We beefed up the balance sheet. We didn't do any distributions. And so we just wanted to make sure that we could go into 20 for a recession. I am so glad we did that because we needed every single one of those tools to be able to deal with this and still be able to think through the major issues. But we are not immune to what everyone is feeling. If you have any commercial properties and or residential properties, are people paying rent? Are you going to be subject to a rent strike? What's force majeure look like? What is business interruption insurance? And those are the big 4 corner components. But the real tough stuff is in the middle. I mean, I don't have to tell you, one of our tenants is in the news for about to go bankrupt. Well, they're not in default until they go bankrupt. So it's the pregame before the game and all the other things that go along with that. And so we are definitely chopping through that wood. But in terms of what I think is going to happen going forward, I think the line that I think everyone should know is that we turned off this economy with a single movement in a light switch. If you kind of look broadly, what's going to be even harder and even look more disjointed is how we bring it back. It's going to look more like a dimmer turning the light on than it is going to be a single light switch. And frankly, I think what's missing in the conversation this week that will end up in the headlines next week is we're going to stop talking about testing and getting enough testing and start talking about the capacity and methodology for testing to happen on a consistent basis. And I'm talking testing weekly or bi-weekly, because if you come to work Monday through Friday and go to the movies on Saturday, you come back with COVID on Monday, you have the same issue as you did 2 months ago. So, and until we are able to get testing to happen on a frequent basis and have transparency about who has been tested and who's not, who has a fever and who doesn't, the big rocks, school, business travel, mass transit, none of that's going to happen at scale. I know everyone's talking about the small businesses, and I think that's important. But until you have those three things happening at scale, then the rest of the economy is not going to be working.
Got it. So let me do this. I want to pivot for a second and really talk about kind of relationships and mentors in a second. Have do that, I want to just let the participants on the phone know, and about after Jair's next response, I want to open up to actually have you all ask questions for Q&A. So Jair, if you could talk a little bit about kind of the impact that your mentors had on kind of in your career, and how do you think about the existence and the development of network and relationships in this community. I think that would be helpful for the folks to hear.
I think it starts with a value structure, and do you treat people with respect? Do you meet people where they are? Do you remember people? Do you have empathy for people? And then I think it comes down to, are you deliberate in terms of reaching out and making sure your network is there? For some reason, my daughter was flipping through one of my college yearbooks or something like that, and I forgot. I mean, there was only 1,600 people in my class at school. I didn't know all of them. But if you're thinking about starting a business and you're thinking about really setting a network, it probably should have been more than the 40 people that I knew well. May not be the 1,600, but you've got to be able to have deep and meaningful relationships with people, not just LinkedIn relationships, deep and meaningful relationships with people, because you don't know where they're going to be over time. And especially if they're in your industry or have some sort of connection to where you may be going professionally, those relationships are very important. Last week, we had an issue on a permit. I haven't made a call on a permit in several years, but there was a relationship there that my team said, look, I think, look at this org chart. And we saw the org chart, and there was someone in an agency that I did not know that was even there. But I had talked to, once a year, twice, every 2 years. And that was close enough that we were able to pick up the phone and it was solved in that day. And that's because 10 years ago, we were able to make a deep, meaningful connection at that point, and that carried forward today. So I think it's one, making sure you're aware of how big your network needs to be, being very deliberate about it, and then recognizing in any kind of relationship, whether it's mentor or just other business relationship, it's the kernels that people provide that are the things that you have to take away and run with. Someone may not be able to stand there with you and look over that spreadsheet for the rest of the time, but if they told you there's 3 things you always have to remember, as long as that's on your desk and you're going through it and you're checking for those 3 things, then they've made their impact. And I think that's really important. If you can get people to walk you through their stories, because I think stories are really important, then you can extrapolate from those stories of how that's applicable to you, and you can utilize kernels of information that can be very valuable.
Great. Thanks, Jair. So any questions from folks on the phone? And as you unmute, can you just say your name and the name of your organization and ask your question?
Hey, this is Faraji from South Bank. Hey, Jair.
How you doing?
Thanks for joining us in these weird times. You made a really good point about how you guys had stress tested and started planning for this, and balance sheet, and just thinking about reality as it stands now for a lot of us small and solo entrepreneurs and organizations. I mean, what are you seeing as the opportunities for us to team up with folks like yourselves and other bigger players? Like, what are people looking for?
So you guys know the organization Zoom. We're not using it now, but 4 months ago, they were basically doing 10 million users worldwide a day, right? Now they're at 200 million. And so the CEO made a very, very good point by saying, we are stopping all new production, all new research and development. We are detailing all of those people who are trying to move the company forward to deal with the issues that we have today. And for them, it's a good issue, right? They're at 200 million people. But that means there's no one doing business development. There's no one doing R&D. There's no one doing any of the forward things that's going to move the organization in a specific direction. And so I think that's the case for a lot of companies right now. I have pulled half my BD staff to go deal with issues that may be happening on different projects. And so I think the solo entrepreneurs, other folks, have to realize where those ebbs and flows are in each one of those companies and start filling those holes. And so it may be leasing, it may be biz dev, it may be X, Y, and Z. But once they realize where those holes are, that's where they could actually bring a lot of value.
Right. I think there's a question in the box by Tessa. How are you looking at your sale products, i.e. condos, now that COVID-19 has started its disruption?
Right. So great question. As you may know, we have a 460,000 square foot project that we're developing in front of the National Stadium. We intentionally developed it as 2 branded apartment buildings, but last year made the decision to switch one of those buildings to condominium. Is that for me? No, that's not for me. Okay. So I think the key there is that we underwrote it as apartments. We could execute it as apartments. We have the optionality to look at condominiums. We have done, in March, we did 8 sales at over $5 million, which is more than our monthly average. So we think that even if we get a slowdown in April and May, we'll still be at the business plan with the escape route of being able to get back to apartment as we originally underwrote it if we have to. We still think that and you could see the buyer profile, there are a lot of people in DC, and thank goodness there's a diversified job base here. But there are a lot of people at DoD, there's a lot of people in health, and there's a lot of people who are utilizing this as a place for them to live as their primary residence. And so we have seen very little issues. We are 70 plus condos sold via contract before we delivered the building. And of those 70, there's only 3 or 4 people that we are concerned about of whether or not either credit or job relocation or other things could create problems. And so we still feel bullish about the condo market. We're not big condo developers. This isn't a green light to go do 20 other condo projects, but we think at that location that we can do fine, and we have a reasonable backup plan if we elect to go condo, if the mortgage finance industry drops out or something like that in the next 60 days, which is highly unlikely.
Other questions?
Hello, Jair.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Hello. Oh, yes. Can you hear me? I'm trying to put my phone off. Oh, okay. Hello. This is Alicia Burke with Rich Capital Concepts Organization. We're formerly known as Christmas Addicts Museum and Park of the Arts, and so we keep up to date with the McMillan project that you're doing in our neighborhood. So really looking forward to seeing that come to life one day. I know everything's kind of moving forward with that now finally. So excited about that and congratulations. And so with our organization, we are re-erecting our youth center in Northwest. And so it's kind of going to be like a mixed use development. I know your McMillan project is also a mixed use development. A lot of different components will be added to that site. With the COVID-19 happening, how do you see mixed-use developments being in demand versus more like affordable housing kind of being an angle that everyone's going to be looking at with maybe the recession and people needing housing and needing relocation or also just access to housing in Washington, D.C.?
Well, I think a great question. I think the way I'll frame it for everyone is your question is about demand drivers and those demand drivers versus what can be built and how people will feel comfortable. Retail is definitely going to have issues until people feel like they are comfortable to get in the water again. As I indicated, if you're not willing to get on the subway, why are you going to go to a restaurant or a bar that's crowded? And so, because you may be getting on the subway to get to work, but you're going to go spend your money to go in a crowded bar, you may not do that until you feel comfortable. And so we are very much looking at the operators that are smart, the ones that are really pivoting their business to actually have pickup and the curbside pickup, buy online, pick up in store is really starting to bleed into food and beverage. And we think the businesses that are doing that are the ones that are going to come back stronger and faster. But it may mean that they may have less space requirements. So they may only go from 50 seats instead of 75 versus 100 seats because they realize that they can make money, especially when they start cutting out. This is going to be a real damage on the Uber Eats and the other platforms. When they start cutting out that middleman, they're going to realize that they can make some decent money that way. And I think if they can keep those customers continuing to do, one of their 3 meals that they're doing out a week to be pickup, I think that's going to dramatically change the way retail is sized and thought about over the next couple of years.
Good, thank you.
Hey, Jair, can you hear me?
Yes.
This is DR McKinney with Rose Ridge Strategies. Appreciate you making time. I just wanted to ask a question more about the capital side, and I've heard you talk about this in other talks. But could you talk about 2 things? Really, one, your decision to go for institutional capital instead of kind of more traditional friends and family or family office, and how that's affected your business, and whether you would advise startups like ourselves to consider institutional capital or building our businesses to be able to take institutional capital. And can you also talk about how COVID has affected?
All right, Tiara, good to hear from you. I heard the first part. I'll answer it, and then I'll let you do the follow-up because you definitely tried to get it out, but it got muddled. So the first is a decision between institutional capital as well as family offices and others. I would say that whether it's family office or institutional capital, there's a step up that has to be done once you leave kind of your own money as well as friends and family money. And so the real question is, do you want to make the big step up and recognize that you then have to maintain it, or do you want to take a baby step to family office? Both are reasonable ways to get there. We were in an environment in 2006 and 2007 where real estate was hot. And so there were opportunities to be able to get to that double step in one shot that may not be out there today. And therefore taking the intermediate step of going to a family office scenario, I think is perfectly reasonable. But it really is about the opportunity set, the business office that you want to create, and all the other components that go along with it. There's 2 or 3 extra layers with institutional capital that you have to be aware of than with a family office. But you still have to, have clean books. You still got to have a decent business plan. You still got to be able to show them that there's a balance sheet there. So I think all of those things really are important. And then your network. It is a really, really, really tight and small network to get to that institutional capital base. And any way you can get there is a decent path, but it's really tight. And so there's been everyone says there's a wash of capital out there. But when you talk to folks who are fundraising, especially small and emerging managers, it's been fairly dire for the last 12 to 18 months.
Yep. So yeah, that was my second part of the question, which is what are you seeing right now in the capital markets for your project?
So we are seeing that our capital partners are very much watching what's happening in the stock market. They have to be within certain allocations and certain percentages, and so when the stock market drops, they get out of balance. So XYZ capital partner may say that we want 10% to real estate. Well, that 10% on real estate was when Microsoft was trading at 100. And when Microsoft's trading at 60, then they're completely out of whack. And so they're 100% behind every existing project that you have, 100% behind any screamer of a project you can bring to them. But a middle of the fairway project that's going to keep their neck out on the line of being out of balance, probably not going to do it, no matter what the capital partner is. But they're very interested in getting things done. As you probably talked to Ulysses, but we did put some land under LOI in March. We closed on something in March. We closed on something in April, and we have one more LOI for land that we should be under LOI by the end of the month. So we think that as long as you're bringing, we always say you got to have best ideas. That's what gets you in the door. And then you got to have, top of the line execution. You got to be in the top 5 of your class. Because if you're not, they have so many other options, and they're being, so many people are talking to them. So I think both of those things hold true even in this pandemic moment.
Great. So we have a couple. Sorry, thanks, Tiara. So we have a couple questions in the chat. So Rob, when you did your first DC project, the YMCA, were you a solo entrepreneur working on it as a consultant, or did you have staff? And then there's a follow-up question: who was your first hire, what role, and how did you find the fund? How did you have the funds for that growth?
Right. So when I got back to DC, I essentially started the shingle with what most people do, which is consulting services that can put food on the table and can kind of get you some growth. And so, yes, the first few years of being back in DC was primarily development services for clients. And I was using my network when I got back to DC to be able to land those opportunities. Thurgood Marshall Center, perfect example. I don't know if most people may know Dotson Realty. Norris Dotson was the chair, and Charles County, a Stanford grad, was the vice chair. And so between two of them, I was able to convince them of my abilities, and they needed someone who could work in the neighborhoods. And every single one of the large development shops said, no, we don't do that. And so it was relationships, but it was also opportunity plus skill set that allowed me to step into that and slowly but surely utilize those fees, not pulling monies out of the company to then hire people that could help with the development, and then very quickly all the other suite of business office services that I had to outsource, whether it was accounting and other components, until there was enough dollars in place to kind of bring all that in-house and be able to build that business office in-house.
Great. And then Cherie has one question. What advice would you give a small developer when pitching a project to a large developer?
Clarity of vision, I think, is the most important thing. And the clarity of vision, you almost have to see it and understand it. And if you've ever either done a mortgage loan or have been around a project where it had to get financing, everyone knows that there's a book about this thick with all the key components of a project and all key components of the sponsor of that project. And somehow, some way, you're going to have to let the people you're pitching to know that that's there, and that you can condense it down into a 10-minute pitch book. Because what we often find is that someone has the 10-minute pitch book down perfectly, but there's nothing behind it. And that's when people really, and you can find that out really quickly. And so when people say, "Oh, my pitch didn't go too well," it was probably not what was the slides that were on the screen. It was probably what you couldn't answer or provide assurance that it was there. And so I always tell people that you have to think through that entire underwriting book, and I'm sure there's some tools you've been talking about inside this cohort. Whether it's vision, entitlements, market analysis, construction data, all of those things that basically say, I know what the lemonade that I'm supposed to create here, and I know how it's supposed to get done, and I'm here because I'm missing a piece or part of it. There's nothing wrong to not have it all together, there's something wrong when you don't know that you don't have everything together. And I think that's what people suss out very quickly.
That's great advice. So just a quick follow-up from Cherie. If someone has a concept for land development, how far along would you expect the small developer to take it prior to pitching the concept?
I mean, it may be as early. It depends, when do you need their money or when do you need their expertise? Because you can say, look, this is as far as I can take it. I can't go any further, and therefore I know there's 6 more pieces to this puzzle that I haven't figured out, but I have the first 3. Again, there's nothing wrong with that. I think what's wrong is that when people walk in with bravado to say, I've got all 10 pieces figured out, and they don't. Or they say, I've got it all figured out, and they really only have 3, and are not humble enough to say that there's other pieces that either I know or may not know of what needs to be done.
So before someone else jumps in, so Jair, just a question. I guess maybe there's 2 questions I have. One is, why aren't there, in your mind, more minority developers in DC?
I don't know if it's minority developers. I mean, look, I remember getting back in 1998, starting the business, and I must have been here 2-3 months. And I went to a meeting, and Marion Barry was there, and Marion doesn't go anywhere unless there were 50 people in the room. So there were 50 businesses in the room. And he started off the conversation with, how many of you are 2nd generation businesses? And 2 people raised their hands. And he says, look, I'm going to make sure that you have the opportunity. You have to make sure that you're doing your side of the table and build a business. And that really stuck with me when he said that, because he recognized that the opportunity through the political arena or through policy arena can take you but so far. But then there needs to also be a commitment to actually building businesses, and development is one that is it is a 20 to 30 year business to get out in front of it. It is not as fast as building a tech company. It is not as fast as building any type of service company, because the balance sheet has to go along with it. And that is what takes so long to build up. And I think that deters a lot of folks in terms of doing it. And I commend folks who want to do it. I just also remind them that it's a significant challenge, because I'll never forget having those first conversations, and someone told me, you may have great ideas, Jair, but we have unequal balance sheets. And I may have said that before to you, but that one has always stuck with me, because I was mad, and I was angry, and I was hurt. And as you can imagine, at one point in my brain, I was like, oh, it's race and all this other stuff, and it might have been part of that. But balance sheets talk, and you really have to build that balance sheet in order to be able to play. And I'm sure you see that, Ellis, you see that in the banking industry as well.
Yeah.
When you guys have to do it, and that is a tough one to digest, unless you're told up front.
Hi, good afternoon. This is Howard Irvin with Parallax Development Group. I have a question for Jair. To piggyback on what you just said, we're developing 90 units of senior housing in Prince George's County in Clinton, and we're in pre-development. We anticipate our closing, or rather our groundbreaking, in late 2021. We're in pre-development. We've already identified other projects that we're looking to do, and the thing that we are running into with regard to that, I mean, we initially bought our land, and kind of what you said earlier, we took it as far as we could, and then we found development partners to work with us to help us carry to the finish line. But when you're trying to grow and scale up and do other projects, because we've identified several now, a lot of times people want to see your track record, and when you don't have something physical to show, there's no groundbreaking yet, right? There's nothing that I can show you tangibly. Look, we did this successfully. It's very hard to get people's attention. Do you have any advice or ideas on how to navigate through that challenge? Greatly appreciate any answer you can provide.
Yeah, that is one we deal with all the time. That's the other big hurdle, I think, is with real estate development companies, is that track record in theory is really only until you get a certificate of occupancy, if you're saying you're a developer. And frankly, that is number one in the questions that we have when we hire people. Because if they acquired the property, then they're an acquisitions person. If they did pre-development, then they're an entitlements person. But they're not a developer until they take it all the way through and get a certificate of occupancy. And so I think one of the things that we did is we took smaller projects and executed on them and got certificates of occupancy. We're able to get through the life cycle side of it and utilize that as a means of saying it may not have been $100 million, but all of these things happened and we can clearly map how all of this works. We're just now trying to add the zeros. That doesn't completely change the conversation, but it does get you some additional credibility in terms of how it works. But that's being patient enough to get through some of those. I know if you're a solo entrepreneur and it's day one and you've never done it, it's a tough conversation to say, I know what's going to happen at the, how to get through a punch list or how to get your green certification, or I know how to do all of those things, and you really haven't done it. But if you say, I did it over here and it was $20 million and not 100, then that might be able to get you in the door to be able to get that larger project.
Yeah, and that's exactly my. You're hitting it head on, dead on. The reason why we bought the first project we kind of did things backwards because we were initially trying to partner with groups. We find opportunities, and hey, we don't know anything about you. We don't, your balance sheet doesn't match ours. It's too much of a risk. That's okay. And so we found an opportunity, and we just put all our money down, and bought it outright. Kind of on a wing and a prayer. Turns out we were right, and things start shaping out. And next thing you know, all the different development people we start to, it went from no to maybe to we got a couple of yeses. Right. And then we're still, you chose a development group to work with, and we're moving along. But it's like we want to replicate this over and over again. And again, we're finding the same issue all over again. We're talking about another deal. Like, hey, this one makes sense too. Well, track record, balance sheet, all comes. It's like I feel like I'm right back where I started, and that's what's the most challenging for me. But I will take what you say under advisement as far as the smaller deals. The
one thing I would say, just to be provocative, not because this is how you get it done, but maybe that's why you have to reconsider when you brought the partner on. Because when you brought the partner on, maybe you could have gotten some liquidity that'll allow you to at least replicate what you did once before. You put $10 in that one. If you had gotten $7 out, maybe you would have been able to. That would have been a true partner, because then they would have enabled you to go do your business somewhere else. But right now, you probably still have that $10 in. You supposedly have a partner, but that partner is not really allowing you to go to do any other business. They've got you captured.
Right. Good point. That's a good point.
So,
good point.
Just again, just to be provocative, it's something to think about.
Got you. Thank you.
Hey, Jair, this is Thomas Houston from the DC Road. Want to ask a couple of questions. We're actually a charter based out of Deanwood, and so our first question is, what are your thoughts behind the East of the River condo market? And then the second question is, when you think about recruiting retail towards 7 and 8, retail typically looks at household income, graduation rate, et cetera. And so what are your thoughts behind recruiting retail to attainable housing development?
So I'll do it in reverse order. I think DR and I had this conversation before. So what has become painfully obvious to us is that it's not just household income, it's also density. And I don't mean density in terms of just the built environment, density in terms of people, the amount of population within a half mile of XYZ location. So for instance, when we bought the Penn Branch Shopping Center, now called Shops at Penn Branch, we were ecstatic that the median income was about $65,000. And that's about the median income of Petworth. And so we were very bullish about the idea of attracting a grocer at that location. And we quickly figured out that in Petworth, there is 17,000 people within half a mile making $65,000. In Hillcrest, there's 5,000 people making $65,000. And so we could not get a good look from any grocer because we just didn't have the number of people within a half a mile. And so you then look at where is there another kind of single family home location that's on a transit corridor, and you just have to go across the river to AU Park up Massachusetts Avenue, and you also have about 5,000 people within a half a mile, but the incomes are $120,000. So it's the A and the B that you have to hit together to get good retail, and you just don't have that. And that's not indicative of the residents who live there who have solid jobs. It's just that they don't have many neighbors, and therefore you can't operate a full service grocery store, especially when DC people don't like to hear this, but you can go across the line and there's some options out there. So retail east of the river, I think because of density and income, are going to be concentrated into 2 or 3 specific nodes. And after that, it's just going to fall off. And so I tell people you should not be out there trying to do retail underneath housing in Deanwood if downtown Ward 7 is grabbing any and all retailers that are available. You shouldn't be at the back of Alabama on a curved road, and just because it has an MU zoning, you want to do retail when Skyland's getting redeveloped and the city has dumped all kinds of resources in to make that node work. Same thing on Georgia Avenue. The 3,500 block to the 4,000 block of Georgia Avenue, maybe. Right around the metro station, that node is going to move. But the node that's at the 6,200 block at Georgia and Kennedy, that's tough.
It's great. So we're just about out of time. So I want to just end by just thanking you, Jair, yet again for just coming on this and being part of this conversation and dropping some wisdom. I think we talked earlier before you got on around the importance of a network and mentors. Mm-hmm. And I think, through the conversation today, I think that each one of the folks on the phone can at least point to a few different nuggets that you've or pearls that you've provided to them. And I think, again, appreciate you for coming on today and for your continual support of developers in the region.
Well, I got to really give you a shout out, Ellis, because providing this cohort of developers kind of the way in which they can grow, the way in which they can think about it. I am more than happy to be part of this to help this cohort. There's some real stars in this group. I know many of them. And I look forward to each and every one of them being successful coming out of this pandemic.
That's great.
Jair, before you get off, excuse me, this is Jay Briley. One of our cohorts, Terry Good, unfortunately just found out that his brother has the coronavirus, so he had to get off the horn. But he wanted me to reach out to you.
Yeah, he wants to talk.
He's from the Emmanuel Baptist Church.
Yep, I know it.
Okay, he wanted me to let you know, or wanted to find out from you, what's the best way to reach you.
He did.
To something that he wanted to talk to you about.
Yeah, he reached out. He went through the right channels, and we're planning on setting something up.
Okay, very good. I just wanted to follow through with that because, like I say, he had to get off the horn. So hopefully all of us keep his brother in his in our
send him my best.
Yeah,
will
likewise.
Do. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you all for joining us today. Really appreciate it. Kayla, any closing remarks for you or Lauren?
I would just say, echoing your sentiments, Ellis, like Jair, really grateful for your time today, and for the cohort. Well, this is our last session, and I'm certainly going to miss our weekly sessions we've been having on Mondays. This isn't necessarily goodbye. We're here if you need us, and we'll be in touch with some additional sessions. Per the feedback we get from you all from the surveys, you continue to have those conversations with established real estate developers. There's the mentor office hours and a couple of other ongoing engagements that we have in the works. So we're here if you need us, and I'm just an email away in terms of, where you are in your process and in your projects.
All right.
Great. Well, thank you all so much. I really appreciate you. Thanks again, Jair. Appreciate it.
Thanks so much.
All right. Stay safe, everybody.
All right, you too.
Bye.